The certified letter arrived on February 3rd, 3 weeks before tax season would turn my life into a beautiful nightmare of numbers. And the Homeowners Association of Meadowbrook Estates had decided this was the perfect time to destroy my business. I stood in my kitchen in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, staring at the fine notice for $500. My crime. The small, tasteful wooden sign in my front yard that read Daniel Harris, CPA Tax Preparation and Accounting Services, with my phone number beneath it. I had put it up in December, right after moving into this cookie-cutter suburban development, and not a single person had said anything until now. "This is insane," I muttered, reading through the violation notice again. According to the letter, signed by someone named Karen Grayson, the president of the HOA, my sign violated Section 14.3 of the Community Covenants, which prohibited commercial signage on residential properties. The fine was immediate, and I had 7 days to remove the sign or face additional penalties of $100 per day. I grabbed my phone and dialed the number listed on the letterhead. A woman answered on the third ring with a voice that sounded like she gargled gravel and entitlement for breakfast. Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, Karen speaking. "Hi, this is Daniel Harris. I just received a fine about my business sign." "Oh yes, Mr. Harris." Her tone went from professional to condescending in half a second. "I personally inspected your property last week. That sign is a clear violation. I understand there might be rules, but I'm an accountant. I'm actually the only CPA in Cedar Rapids who does individual tax prep. People need to know where to find me, especially with tax season starting in a few weeks." "That's not my concern, Mr. Harris. Rules are rules. The sign needs to come down and the fine needs to be paid within 30 days. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Is there any way to appeal this? Maybe we could discuss it at the next board meeting." "The next meeting isn't until March 15th. She sounded almost pleased about this. "But I can tell you right now that the board will uphold the violation. We've worked very hard to maintain the aesthetic standards of this community." "March 15th. That's right in the middle of tax season. I'll have clients coming to my house every day by then. Then I suggest you inform them of your address through other means. Good day, Mr. Harris." She hung up before I could respond. I stared at my phone, feeling my blood pressure rising. This woman had just casually threatened to fine me into oblivion during the busiest time of my professional year. I walked to my front window and looked at the sign. It was beautiful, actually. I had paid a local craftsman $200 to make it from cedar wood with routed letters painted in forest green. It matched the house perfectly, was only 2 feet tall, and sat tastefully near the mailbox. If anything, it added charm to the property. My phone rang. It was Mrs. Patterson, one of my longtime clients who had followed me from my old office downtown when the lease got too expensive. "Daniel, dear, I drove by your house today to make sure I remembered where it was. That sign out front is just lovely." "Thanks, Mrs. Patterson. Though I might have to take it down soon." "Whatever for?" I explained the situation, and she made a disgusted sound. "That's ridiculous. How are people supposed to find you? I've been telling everyone at my bridge club about you. Half of them need a good accountant." After I hung up with her, I did what any reasonable person would do. I went outside, looked at the sign again, and decided it was staying exactly where it was, at least until I could figure out a strategy. The next morning, I started researching Iowa HOA laws. I had gone to school for accounting, not legal studies, but I understood contracts and regulations well enough. What I found was interesting. While HOAs in Iowa did have the right to enforce covenants, those covenants couldn't violate state or federal law. More importantly, There were specific provisions about home-based businesses. I spent 3 hours digging through Iowa Code Chapter 335 and various court cases. By noon, I had found something promising. Iowa law protected the rights of residents to operate home-based businesses as long as they didn't create excessive traffic, noise, or other disturbances. My accounting practice was about as quiet as a business could get. I drafted a formal letter to Karen Grayson and the HOA board, citing the relevant statutes and requesting that they reconsider the fine. I kept it professional and factual, explaining that my business was legally permitted under Iowa law and that the covenant, if interpreted to prohibit all home-based business signage, might be unenforceable. I sent it via certified mail that afternoon. Then I called my friend Marcus, who was an attorney specializing in real estate law in Des Moines. "Danny, good to hear from you. How's the new house? Problematic. I've got an HOA issue." I explained everything and Marcus listened quietly. When I finished, he laughed. "Man, I hate HOAs. They attract the worst kind of petty tyrants, but you might actually have a case here. The Iowa Supreme Court ruled a few years back that HOA covenants can't supersede state business regulations. Let me send you some case law." I already found some of it. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. "You're not crazy. You're just dealing with someone who probably has nothing better to do than measure people's grass height with a ruler. My advice: stand your ground, document everything, and if they keep pushing, we can file for an injunction. I don't want to spend thousands on legal fees over a sign." Then call their bluff. Most HOAs back down when they realize someone actually knows their rights. These people rely on intimidation, not actual legal authority. I thanked him and hung up feeling slightly better. But that confidence lasted exactly 2 days. On February 6th, I went outside to get my mail and found a new notice stapled to my sign. This one informed me that the 7-day deadline had been reduced to 72 hours due to continued willful violation, and that the daily fine would now be $200 instead of $100. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of everything. Then, I called Karen Grayson again. This time, she didn't even pretend to be professional. "Mr. Harris, I see you're choosing to ignore our warnings. I sent you a letter explaining why the fine is invalid under Iowa law. I received your little legal essay. The board reviewed it and found it unconvincing. This is a private community with private rules that you agreed to when you purchased your home. I agreed to reasonable restrictions, not illegal ones." Her voice turned icy. "I would be very careful about how you proceed, Mr. Harris. The board has significant resources, and we will not tolerate residents who think they are above the rules. Remove the sign by February 9th at 5 p.m., or we will remove it for you and add the cost to your fines. You can't just come onto my property and remove my belongings." Section 22.7 of the Covenants gives the board the right to remedy violations at the owner's expense. I suggest you read your paperwork more carefully. And by the way, we've also noted that your grass needs edging along the sidewalk. That's another violation. She hung up again. I stood there, shaking with anger. This woman was escalating because I had dared to push back. The grass comment was pure retaliation. My lawn looked fine. I immediately called Marcus back. "They're threatening to come onto my property and remove the sign themselves." "When?" "February 9th at 5 p.m. if I don't take it down." "Okay, here's what we do. I'll draft a cease and desist letter today and send it overnight. That should make them think twice. If they actually trespass and remove your property, that's conversion and you can file a police report and a civil suit. This is getting out of hand over a sign. Welcome to HOA warfare, my friend. These things get ugly fast. Marcus sent the cease and desist letter that afternoon. It was 5 pages of dense legal language that essentially said if anyone from the HOA came onto my property without permission, they would be facing criminal trespass charges and a lawsuit. February 9th arrived. I worked from home that day, keeping an eye on my front yard. At 4:45 p.m., a white pickup truck pulled up in front of my house. Karen Grayson got out, along with 2 men I didn't recognize. She was exactly what I had pictured. Mid-50s, blonde hair cut in that aggressive wedge style, wearing a puffy vest over a turtleneck despite the relatively mild weather. She carried a clipboard like a weapon. I walked outside before they could reach my sign. "Can I help you?" Karen looked at me with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Harris, we're here to remedy your violation since you've refused to comply. I have an attorney who sent you a cease and desist letter. If you touch that sign, you'll be trespassing and committing theft." One of the men, a large guy in a Carhartt jacket, looked uncomfortable. "Madam, maybe we have every right to be here," Karen interrupted. "This is HOA business. This is my private property. I'm asking you to leave." She stepped closer to me, and I could smell her perfume, something floral and overwhelming. "You think you're special because you're an accountant. You think the rules don't apply to you. I've been managing this community for 8 years, and I've dealt with dozens of people like you. You always cave eventually. Not this time." Her face flushed red. "That sign is coming down today one way or another. If you touch it, I'm calling the police." We stared at each other for a long moment. The 2 men behind her shifted nervously. Finally, one of them spoke up. "Karen, he's right. If he's got a lawyer involved, we could get in trouble." She whirled on him. "Don't be ridiculous, Tom. The board authorized this." "The board didn't authorize you to commit a crime," I said. "Leave now, or I'm making the call." I pulled out my phone and held it up. Karen's face went through several shades of red before settling on purple. She spun around and marched back to the truck. "This isn't over, Mr. Harris. You just made a very big mistake." They drove off, and I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My hands were shaking. I had never been good at confrontation, and that had been one of the most stressful 5 minutes of my life. I called Marcus immediately. They came. I stopped them. But Karen Grayson just threatened me again. Perfect. That was witnessed, right? Her own people were there. Even better. I want you to write down everything that was said while it's fresh in your mind. Include descriptions of everyone who was there. If this goes to court, that could be valuable. I spent the next hour documenting everything. Then I tried to focus on work, but my concentration was shot. I had tax returns to prepare, client meetings to schedule, and instead I was dealing with HOA drama. The next morning, February 10th, I woke up to find my sign gone. Not just removed. Gone. And in its place was a new violation notice informing me that I now owed $2,300 in accumulated fines, plus a $700 remediation fee for the cost of removing the sign. I stood in my front yard in my bathrobe, staring at the empty space where my sign had been, feeling something beyond anger. This was now about principle. I called the Cedar Rapids Police Department and filed a theft report. The officer who came out, a tired-looking man in his 40s named Officer Rodriguez, took my statement and examined the area. "So the HOA took your sign?" "Yes. After I explicitly told them not to, and after my attorney sent a cease and desist letter." "You have proof they took it?" I showed him photos of the sign, the violation notices, and screenshots of my text conversation with one of the men who had been there yesterday. Tom, the guy in the Carhartt jacket, had actually sent me an apology text late last night saying he didn't know Karen was planning to come back and remove the sign after dark. Officer Rodriguez wrote everything down. I'll file the report, but I have to be honest with you, civil disputes like this are tricky. The HOA will claim they had authority under your covenants. But that's not how property law works. They can't just take my things. I agree with you. But getting a prosecutor to file charges on something like this is tough. Your best bet is civil court. After he left, I called Marcus again. He was starting to sound excited, which worried me. They actually took it, after the cease and desist came back at night, apparently. Danny, they just handed you a perfect case. That's willful violation of the cease and desist, conversion of property, and possibly trespassing depending on how we argue it. I can file an emergency motion for an injunction and a lawsuit for damages. How much is this going to cost me? For an emergency motion and a basic lawsuit, I can probably keep it under $5,000 in legal fees if they settle quickly. If it goes to trial, more. But here's the thing, you can ask for attorney's fees as part of the judgment. If we win, they pay for everything. I thought about it. $5,000 was a lot of money, but I had some savings. More importantly, I thought about every other person in this neighborhood who might want to run a small business from home, everyone who might face Karen Grayson's wrath for some arbitrary violation. Someone had to stand up to this. Do it. File everything. You're sure? I'm sure. Marcus filed the emergency motion that afternoon. By Iowa law, the court had to schedule a hearing within 5 days. We got a date for February 15th, which was cutting it close to the start of busy season, but I didn't have a choice. I spent the next few days preparing tax returns and documenting everything related to the HOA situation. I also printed new business cards with just my address and phone number. No sign needed. My clients could still find me, even if the HOA had tried to make it harder. On February 13th, 2 days before the hearing, something unexpected happened. I received a visit from another neighbor, a man in his 60s named Robert Chen who lived 3 houses down. I heard about your trouble with the HOA, he said when I answered the door. I wanted to give you this. He handed me a manila folder. Inside were dozens of documents, violation notices, fine letters, and correspondence between various residents and Karen Grayson. The complaints ranged from reasonable to absurd. One homeowner had been fined for having a wreath on their door in July because it was a seasonal decoration displayed out of season. Another had been cited for parking their car on the street in front of their own house for more than 4 hours. What is all this? Evidence that Karen has been abusing her authority for years. Most people just pay the fines because it's easier than fighting. But some of us have been keeping records. When I heard you were taking her to court, I thought you should have this. Why hasn't anyone challenged her before? Robert sighed. Because she's vindictive. She'll make your life miserable if you cross her. Most people don't want the stress. But I'm retiring next month and moving to Arizona. I don't have to worry about her anymore. Make her answer for this. I invited Robert inside, and he told me stories about Karen's reign over Meadowbrook Estates. She had been HOA president for 8 years, running unopposed in every election because she had driven out anyone who dared to challenge her. She controlled the board by surrounding herself with people who owed her favors. She had used HOA funds to pay for improvements to her own property by claiming they were community investments. She had even allegedly falsified violation reports to target people she didn't like. The thing is, Robert said, she's not doing this for the community. She's doing it for power. She likes controlling people. Your sign situation is just the latest example. After Robert left, I went through all the documents carefully. If even half of what was in here was true, Karen Grayson had been running the HOA like her personal fiefdom. I scanned everything and sent it to Marcus. He called me an hour later, sounding more excited than ever. "Danny, this is gold. We can use this to establish a pattern of harassment and abuse of authority. I'm going to amend our motion to include some of this information. Is it all admissible? Some of it will be. And even if the judge doesn't allow it all, it paints a picture. HOAs are supposed to serve the community, not the ego of one person." The hearing on February 15th was held at the Lynn County Courthouse downtown. I wore my best suit and arrived 30 minutes early. Marcus met me in the hallway, carrying a thick briefcase. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll be." "Just remember, stay calm, be factual, and let me do most of the talking. The judge will probably ask you some questions directly. Answer honestly and don't let them get you emotional." Karen Grayson arrived with her own attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s named Patricia something. Karen was wearing a business suit that probably cost more than my car payment, and she had the confident air of someone who had never lost one of these battles. We entered the courtroom, and the judge, a woman named Judge Linda Morneau, took the bench promptly at 9 a.m. She reviewed the case file quickly and then looked up at us over her reading glasses. "This is an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and injunction regarding homeowners association violations and property seizure. Mr. Williams, you're representing the plaintiff." Marcus stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Daniel Harris is seeking an immediate injunction preventing the Meadowbrook Estates HOA from enforcing fines related to a business sign, as well as the return of his property and damages." "And Miss Preston, you represent the HOA." Patricia stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The HOA maintains that Mr. Harris violated clearly established covenants and that all actions taken were authorized under the community rules." Judge Morneau nodded. "Let's hear the plaintiff's case first." Marcus laid it out clearly and methodically. He explained my business, the sign, the violation notices, the escalating fines, the threats, and finally the removal of the sign after the cease and desist letter. He presented the Iowa statutes protecting home-based businesses and argued that the HOA covenant was unenforceable because it conflicted with state law. Then he brought up the documents Robert had given me, arguing that they showed a pattern of harassment and overreach by the HOA president. Patricia objected to that evidence, but Judge Morneau allowed it for the limited purpose of establishing context. When it was the HOA's turn, Patricia argued that covenants were legal contracts and that I had agreed to them when I purchased my home. She claimed the sign was commercial activity that degraded the residential character of the neighborhood. She said the HOA had acted within its authority under the covenants, and that my attorney's letter didn't supersede their legal rights. She did not address the nighttime removal of the sign or the escalating fines very convincingly, though. She kept falling back on the covenants allow it, without engaging with the question of whether those specific actions were legal. Judge Morneau asked several pointed questions about whether the HOA board had consulted with an attorney before removing my property. Patricia admitted they had not. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Harris, can you explain exactly what your business involves and how it affects your neighborhood?" I stood, trying not to sound nervous. "Your Honor, I'm a CPA. I prepare tax returns and provide accounting services. During most of the year, I have maybe 1 or 2 clients per week who come to my home office. During tax season, which starts in a few weeks, that increases to maybe 5 or 6 per day. They park in my driveway, come inside for an hour or so, and leave. There's no noise, no inventory, no employees besides me. It's quieter than having friends over for dinner. And the sign, it's a small wooden sign, 2 feet by 18 inches near my mailbox. It just has my name, credential, and phone number. I need it because I'm the only CPA in Cedar Rapids who focuses on individual tax preparation. People need to be able to find me, especially elderly clients who don't use the internet. Judge Morneau made some notes. And you're saying that Iowa law protects your right to operate this business? Yes, Your Honor. Iowa code specifically allows home-based businesses that don't create nuisances. My business fits well within those parameters. Patricia tried to argue that visual pollution from signs was a valid concern, but Judge Morneau cut her off. Counselor, I grew up in a neighborhood where half the homes had small business signs. My own mother ran a piano teaching studio from our house with a sign out front. I'm not convinced that a small professional sign creates any meaningful harm. She flipped through more papers, then looked up at both attorneys. Here's my ruling. The temporary restraining order is granted. The HOA is prohibited from enforcing any fines related to Mr. Harris's business sign pending a full hearing on the merits. The HOA is ordered to return Mr. Harris's sign. In the same condition it was removed, within 48 hours. If the sign cannot be returned, the HOA will reimburse Mr. Harris for its full replacement cost of $200. Karen Grayson made a sound behind her attorney, something between a gasp and a squawk. Judge Morneau continued. Furthermore, I'm scheduling a full hearing for March 20th to determine whether the HOA's covenant violates Iowa business regulations and whether the HOA's actions constitute harassment or conversion of property. Both parties should be prepared to present full arguments at that time. Miss Preston, I strongly suggest your clients consult with you about the legal risks they're facing before that hearing. She banged her gavel, and the hearing was over. Outside the courtroom, Marcus was grinning. That went about as well as it could have. Judge Morneau clearly thinks the HOA overstepped. What happens now? They return your sign or pay for a new one. You can put it back up, and we prepare for the full hearing in March. They might settle before then, honestly. That judge's comments were pretty clear about which way she's leaning. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Thank you, Marcus. Thank me by sending me some tax clients. I need to itemize better. I got home and immediately ordered a replacement sign from the same craftsman, just in case the HOA couldn't return the original. Then I started calling clients to schedule appointments for tax season. The next day, February 16th, I received a furious letter from Patricia Preston stating that the HOA intended to fight the case vigorously, and that I should expect aggressive litigation. It was clearly meant to intimidate me, but after everything that had happened, it just made me more determined. 2 days later, on February 18th, a package arrived. Inside was my original sign, completely undamaged. There was no note, no apology, nothing. Just the sign. I took it outside and reinstalled it in exactly the same spot. Then I took a picture and sent it to Marcus with the caption, "Back in business." He responded with a thumbs up and, "Let's see what they do now." What they did was nothing, at least not directly. But over the next week, I started receiving violation notices for increasingly petty things. My trash cans were visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup. My house numbers were supposedly faded and needed repainting, even though they were perfectly legible. Someone claimed my security camera pointed at the street, which violated privacy rules, even though it only covered my own driveway. Each violation came with a $50 fine. It was death by 1,000 cuts, an obvious retaliation campaign. I documented everything and sent it all to Marcus. They're trying to bury me in small fines. And they're building our harassment case. Keep every single notice. Take photos showing that the violations are bogus. This is actually helping us. Tax season officially started on January 24th, but my busy period really picked up in mid-February. By the last week of February, I was seeing 5 or 6 clients per day, just as I had told the judge. My driveway had a steady stream of cars, and my home office was filled with the rustle of paperwork and the clicking of calculator keys. Mrs. Patterson came in on February 26th with a shoebox full of receipts. She was a sweet woman in her 70s who had been doing her own taxes until last year when it got too complicated. "I heard you had trouble with that awful HOA woman," she said, as she settled into the chair across from my desk. "Word travels fast. Oh, honey, everyone knows. Karen Grayson has been a menace for years. I live over in Woodland Park, and we're all grateful we don't have an HOA like yours. Did you really take her to court?" "I did. We have another hearing in March." "Good for you." "Someone needs to stand up to that woman. She's been terrorizing people for too long." After Mrs. Patterson left, I had back-to-back appointments until 7 p.m. An elderly couple with investment income to report. A young family claiming their first child as a dependent. A small business owner who needed quarterly estimates prepared. It was exactly the kind of work I loved, helping regular people navigate the complexity of the tax code. On March 1st, I got a call from Tom, the man who had been with Karen when she first tried to remove my sign. He asked if he could meet with me, and I agreed, curious about what he wanted. He showed up that evening looking nervous. Tom was in his early 50s, with graying hair and calloused hands that suggested he worked in construction or a similar trade. "I wanted to apologize in person," he said when I opened the door. "I didn't know Karen was going to come back and take your sign that night. She told me and Steve that the situation was handled. I found out later that she went back with her husband. It's okay. I know you were just trying to help the HOA. That's the thing. I'm on the board. I've been on it for 3 years, and I'm starting to realize that Karen has been manipulating all of us. She tells us things are authorized when they're not. She makes decisions without votes. When you stood up to her, it made me look at a lot of other situations differently." He pulled out a folder, similar to the one Robert had given me. "These are internal HOA documents, board meeting minutes, financial records, correspondence. I think you and your lawyer should have them." I took the folder, surprised. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because what's happening isn't right. I joined the HOA board to help maintain the neighborhood, not to harass people over stupid stuff. Karen has been using the HOA as her personal power trip, and she's been hiding things from the board." "Financial things? What kind of financial things?" Tom hesitated. "I'm not an accountant, but some of the expenses don't look right. Payments to vendors that I don't remember approving. Reimbursements to Karen for things that seem excessive. You're a CPA. Maybe you can make sense of it." After Tom left, I spent 2 hours going through the documents. What I found was disturbing. Karen had been using HOA funds for personal expenses disguised as community costs. A $5,000 landscaping consultation that appeared to have been work done exclusively on her property. Multiple payments to a property management company that didn't seem to exist. Reimbursements for community events that never happened. It wasn't massive embezzlement, but over 3 years, Karen had siphoned off at least $15,000 from the HOA's budget. And she had done it by keeping the board in the dark, presenting simplified financial reports that didn't show the details. I called Marcus immediately, even though it was 9 p.m. "You need to see this. Karen's been stealing from the HOA." "Are you sure?" "I'm a forensic accountant. This is literally what I do. She's been running personal expenses through the HOA and falsifying records." Marcus was quiet for a moment. This changes everything. If you're right, we're not just talking about HOA violations anymore. We're talking about fraud, embezzlement, possibly theft by deception. This is criminal. What do I do? First, write up a formal analysis of what you found. Document everything clearly. Then we need to decide whether to bring this to the prosecutor or use it as leverage in the civil case. What do you mean, leverage? I mean, if we show this to Patricia Preston, she's going to advise her client to settle immediately and probably resign from the HOA. Nobody wants to defend an embezzler, but if we go straight to the prosecutor, we could potentially get criminal charges filed. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see Karen face criminal consequences, but another part of me just wanted this whole situation to be over so I could focus on my business. Let me do the analysis first, then we can decide. I spent the next 3 days, between client appointments, putting together a comprehensive report on the HOA's finances. I traced every suspicious transaction, documented the discrepancies, and calculated the total amount that had been misappropriated. By the time I finished, I had a 20-page report with exhibits that clearly showed a pattern of financial misconduct. The total was actually higher than I initially thought. $22,000 over 4 years. Marcus read the report and whistled. This is damning. You could testify as an expert witness on this. So what's our move? I think we show this to Patricia before the March 20th hearing and see how she reacts. If the HOA wants to settle and Karen agrees to resign and pay restitution, maybe we can resolve everything without criminal charges. But if they dig in, we go to the prosecutor. On March 10th, Marcus sent a copy of my report to Patricia Preston with a cover letter explaining that we had discovered evidence of financial misconduct by the HOA president. He requested an emergency meeting before the scheduled hearing. Patricia called him within an hour. Marcus put her on speakerphone in his office while I listened. Mr. Williams, these are very serious allegations. Where did your client obtain internal HOA documents? That's not relevant. The question is whether the allegations are true. I'll need to consult with my clients and review the financial records independently. You have until March 18th. If we don't hear from you by then with a settlement proposal, we're taking this to the Lynn County Attorney's Office. Patricia's voice was strained. I understand. Over the next week, I focused on my work while Marcus handled the legal maneuvering. Tax season was in full swing, and I was working 12-hour days. My dining room had been converted into a secondary filing area, and I had spreadsheets and tax forms covering every surface. On March 17th, Patricia called Marcus to request a settlement conference. We met the next day at Marcus's office in Des Moines. Karen Grayson was not present, but Patricia was there with 2 other HOA board members, Tom, who I already knew, and a woman named Susan Martinez, who was the board treasurer. Susan looked devastated. I had no idea any of this was happening. Karen always presented simplified reports at meetings. She said the details were in the full statements, but she never actually distributed those. Patricia was all business. My clients have reviewed Mr. Harris's analysis and cross-referenced it with bank statements. The findings appear to be accurate. The board is prepared to offer the following settlement. All fines against Mr. Harris are rescinded. He is free to maintain his business sign without restriction. The HOA will pay his attorney's fees up to $10,000, and Karen Grayson will immediately resign as president. Marcus leaned back. And restitution. The board will demand that Miss Grayson repay the misappropriated funds. If she refuses, the board itself will consider filing a lawsuit against her. That's not good enough, I said. She committed fraud. Why should she get to just walk away? Susan spoke up. Because if this becomes public, it will destroy property values in our neighborhood. Every homeowner will be hurt by the scandal. We're willing to handle this internally if it means protecting the community." I looked at Marcus. He gave a small shrug that said it was my call. I thought about it. I thought about all the hours I had spent dealing with this mess, all the stress, all the anger. But I also thought about the other homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates who had nothing to do with Karen's misconduct. Fine. But I wanted in writing that the covenant restricting business signage is amended to allow home-based business signs that meet certain reasonable criteria. Size limits, aesthetic standards, whatever. But no blanket prohibition. And I want Karen Grayson permanently banned from holding any HOA position in this community. Patricia made notes. I believe the board can agree to those terms. Tom nodded. Absolutely. We should have done this years ago. We spent another hour working out the details. By the end, we had a settlement agreement that gave me everything I wanted. My sign, my business, no fines, my legal fees paid, and a guarantee that the HOA would never harass me again. The only thing left was Karen's signature, since she was still technically the president until the board officially accepted her resignation. Patricia promised to get that within 48 hours. I'll make it clear to her that the alternative is criminal prosecution. 2 days later, on March 20th, the day of our scheduled hearing, Marcus received a signed settlement agreement. Karen had agreed to everything, including repaying the $22,000 to the HOA over a 2-year period. Judge Morneau reviewed the settlement in chambers and approved it. The case was closed. I went home that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in months. My sign was in my yard, my business was thriving, and tax season was moving along smoothly. I had appointments booked through April 15th and beyond. That evening, I got an unexpected visitor. Karen Grayson herself. She looked different than she had at the hearing, smaller somehow, defeated. She stood on my porch with her arms crossed, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. "I came to apologize," she finally said, though her tone suggested the words were physically painful. "Okay. I never meant for things to get so out of hand. I was trying to protect the neighborhood standards. You were stealing from the HOA and abusing your authority." Her face flushed. "I made mistakes, but I did care about this community. I spent 8 years trying to make it better." "You spent 8 years bullying people and skimming money. That's not caring, that's control." She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to deflate. "You're right. I know you're right. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and I'm moving. I can't stay here after everything that's happened." "That's probably for the best." She nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, your sign does look nice. It matches the house well." Then she walked back to her car and drove away. I watched her go, feeling something between satisfaction and pity. She had brought this on herself, but it was still sad to see someone self-destruct over something as trivial as a need to control others. Over the next few weeks, life returned to normal. The HOA held emergency elections, and Tom was voted in as the new president. He and Susan worked to reform the association's practices, creating transparency in the budget and scaling back the enforcement of petty violations. Several other homeowners put up small business signs after the covenant was amended. A piano teacher 2 streets over. A massage therapist around the corner. A graphic designer on the next block. It turned out that quite a few people in Meadowbrook Estates ran home-based businesses and had been afraid to advertise because of Karen. My practice thrived. By the time April 15th arrived, I had prepared over 300 tax returns and had picked up dozens of new clients. The sign had more than paid for itself in new business. Mrs. Patterson brought me cookies on April 16th to celebrate the end of tax season. "You did it," she said. "You stood up to that horrible woman and you won." "I got lucky," I said. "If Tom hadn't given me those documents, I might not have found the embezzlement. Luck had nothing to do with it. You knew your rights and you fought for them. That's courage." After she left, I sat in my office and looked around at the stacks of completed returns, the organized files, the computer screen showing my client database. This was exactly what I had wanted when I moved to Cedar Rapids, a successful practice helping people in my community. The HOA situation had been a nightmare, but in a weird way, it had also been an opportunity. I had learned that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when it's expensive and stressful and takes time away from your work. Because the alternative is living under someone else's arbitrary control, and that's no way to live. On April 30th, I received a notice in the mail from the HOA. It was an invitation to the annual community meeting in May, where the new board would be presenting their plans for the upcoming year. There was a handwritten note at the bottom from Tom. "We'd love to have you join the board if you're interested. We need people who aren't afraid to ask tough questions." I thought about it for about 3 seconds before writing back. "Thanks, but no thanks. I've had enough HOA drama for a lifetime." But I did attend the community meeting as a regular member. About 50 homeowners showed up, which Tom said was 3 times the normal attendance. People were clearly interested in the changes happening in the association. Tom and Susan presented a new budget with line item transparency. They showed photos of completed community projects and invited feedback. They announced that the fine structure was being revised to focus on actual nuisances rather than aesthetic preferences. At one point, Tom mentioned the settlement with me without naming me specifically. The board learned a valuable lesson this year about the importance of working with residents rather than against them. HOAs exist to serve the community, not to control it. There was applause at that, and several people came up to me afterward to thank me for standing up to Karen. One man, who I vaguely recognized from seeing him at the neighborhood pool, shook my hand vigorously. I got fined $300 last year for having a basketball hoop in my driveway. Karen said it was an unapproved structure. I paid it because I didn't know I could fight. Thank you for showing us that we don't have to just accept this stuff. On my way out, Susan caught up with me. "I wanted to thank you personally. When we discovered what Karen had been doing with the finances, I felt like an idiot. I'm the treasurer. I should have caught it. She was deliberately hiding it from you. That's not your fault. Still, if you hadn't found it, she might have kept going for years, and I wanted you to know that we've implemented new controls. Every expense over $500 now requires board approval, and we're bringing in an outside auditor annually. That's smart. We're trying to do better. This community deserves better." I left the meeting feeling good about the neighborhood for the first time since I had moved in. The HOA wasn't perfect, but it was moving in the right direction. My business continued to grow throughout the summer. I picked up several small business clients who needed quarterly bookkeeping and payroll services. I hired a part-time assistant, a recent accounting graduate named Jennifer, to help with data entry during busy periods. My home office was getting crowded, and I started looking at commercial office space again, though I wasn't in a hurry. In August, I got a call from Marcus. "Hey, I thought you'd want to know. Patricia Preston called me. Karen Grayson is filing for bankruptcy." "Really?" Apparently, the restitution payments were more than she could afford, and some of the homeowners she had previously fined are filing suit to get their money back now that the financial misconduct is public. She's drowning in legal bills. I felt a pang of something. Not quite sympathy, but not satisfaction either. That's rough. You reap what you sow. Anyway, the HOA is going to get pennies on the dollar in the bankruptcy, but at least Karen won't profit from what she did. After I hung up, I thought about Karen and her need for control, her petty vindictiveness, her willingness to steal from her own neighbors. What made someone behave that way? Was it always about power, or was there something else underneath it all? I didn't have answers, and ultimately, it didn't matter. What mattered was that she couldn't hurt anyone in Meadowbrook Estates anymore. In September, I attended my first post-settlement HOA meeting. I didn't plan to go regularly, but Tom had asked me to come to this one specifically. When I arrived, he announced that the board was creating a new position. A financial oversight committee composed of 3 residents who would review the budget quarterly and report to the full membership. "And we'd like Daniel Harris to chair that committee," Tom said, given his expertise and his commitment to transparency. Everyone looked at me. I hesitated, my instinct to say no. But then I thought about what Mrs. Patterson had said about courage, about standing up for what was right even when it was inconvenient. "I'll do it," I said, on the condition that all financial records are provided promptly and that the committee has real authority to question expenses. "Absolutely," Susan said. "That's exactly what we want." So I became part of the HOA after all, though in a very different role than Karen had ever played. Instead of controlling people, I would be helping ensure that the association served its members honestly and fairly. Over the next year, the committee reviewed every aspect of the HOA's finances. We found a few more questionable expenses from Karen's tenure and recovered some additional money. We also identified several areas where the HOA could save money by bidding out services more competitively. Property values in Meadowbrook Estates actually increased once word got out that the association was being run responsibly. People wanted to live in a neighborhood with reasonable rules and competent management. My accounting practice continued to thrive. By the following tax season, I had over 400 clients and had to hire Jennifer full-time. We converted my garage into additional office space, and the HOA approved the renovation without any hassle. The sign in my front yard stayed exactly where it was, weathering gradually into a distinguished gray patina that matched the house even better than the original finish. Sometimes I would look at it and remember everything it had cost me to keep it there. Thousands in legal fees, weeks of stress, countless hours dealing with HOA drama, but it was worth it. Not because of the sign itself, but because of what it represented. The right to run an honest business. The right to stand up to bullies. The right to live in a community that serves its members rather than controlling them. One afternoon in February, almost exactly a year after the original violation notice, Mrs. Patterson came in for her annual tax appointment. She had gained a daughter-in-law this year and wanted to make sure she was claiming all the right deductions. As I was walking her out, she paused at the door and looked at my sign. "You know, I drive past here sometimes just to see it. It reminds me that good people still win sometimes." "It wasn't really about winning," I said. "Of course it was. You won. She lost. And everyone in this neighborhood is better off because of it." She patted my hand. "Don't be modest, dear. You did a good thing." After she left, I stood in my doorway for a moment, looking at the sign, at my house, at the neighborhood that had become my home despite everything. Mrs. Patterson was right in a way. It had been about winning, but not in the sense of defeating Karen Grayson. It had been about winning the right to live and work with dignity, to be treated fairly, to have rules that made sense and were enforced consistently. Those were the things worth fighting for. I went back inside to my next client, a young couple filing their first joint return after getting married. They were nervous about doing it right, and I spent an hour walking them through every line of the form, explaining what each number meant, and why we were claiming each deduction. This was why I became an accountant, to help people navigate complexity, to reduce their stress, to make their lives a little bit easier. The sign in my yard was just a marker pointing the way, but what a fight it had been to keep that marker standing. And what a victory it had been when that judge's gavel came down and declared that I had every right to let people know I was here, ready to help. As tax season rolled into full swing again, I found myself grateful for everything that had happened, even the hard parts. Because the hard parts had taught me that I was stronger than I thought, that communities could change for the better, and that sometimes the smallest things like a wooden sign could become symbols of much larger principles. Karen Grayson had tried to make me remove that sign to prove she had power over me. Instead, she had proven that power without accountability eventually destroys itself. The sign remained, a quiet testament to the fact that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult and expensive and time-consuming, is always worth it in the end. And every April 15th, when I finally closed my laptop after the last tax return was filed, I would walk outside and look at that sign and remember what it cost to put it there, and what it meant to keep it standing. Not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been bullied by someone with a clipboard and too much time on their hands. The neighborhood had learned its lesson. I had learned mine too. And somewhere out there, maybe Karen Grayson had learned hers as well, though I would never know for sure. What I did know was this. My name was Daniel Harris. I was a CPA, and I was here to help. And anyone who needed to find me could just look for the small wooden sign in my front yard, standing exactly where it belonged.